Tanse. Welcome to the Matriarch Movement video podcast. I'm your host, Shayla Olette Stonechild, and I'm super excited to be here with Adeline Bird. She is from Rolling River First Nations. She's also an Afro-Anishnabe filmmaker, an author, a creative. She's had her own podcast. You have your own books. I mean, you do it all.
I try.
Is there anything that I may be forgetting that you want the listeners to know?
That I'm just like a badass auntie.
There you go.
The end.
And your First Nation is Rolling River First Nation, which is where?
Winnipeg, Manitoba. Maybe about a 2-hour drive away from the city. But I grew up in Winnipeg, Manitoba, which I always say is a massive urban reserve. That's where all these different communities from in and around that area have migrated, and we all kind of just like, the Anishnabes and the Crees all just live amongst each other in the city. But I did spend my summers in Rolling River with my cookum growing up. But it was visiting the res was always and still is visiting the res.
Well, yeah, I've just started to get to know how much advocacy and how many super strong, inspirational women are based in Winnipeg.
Yes.
It's so strong. And
yes.
I feel like there's a really good community out there.
Absolutely. I always tell people, I'm from where Nahani Fontaine is from.
I'm from where
Tasha Spillet's from. I'm from where Leah Gazin's from. Like all these incredible women. And like, I'm so proud of, I always tell people I'm from Winnipeg. Like I'm so proud of Winnipeg. We got like our First Nations premiere. I call it the First Nations Wakanda. Like literally. But like it's Winnipeg's it's a very special place, especially the Matriarch Movement that's happening out there.
Yeah, especially the Forks too.
Yes.
I started to learn more about it because Amazing Race actually started their episode right at the Forks. And then so I was actually reading all the history. I didn't know it was a trading ground, and it was like where the Métis were as well. I was like, oh my gosh, we're literally starting in a very monumental place of history, but also connection to me, to like my Métis side too. So yeah, it's really cool that you come from Winnipeg and like Rolling River First Nation. How did you end up in Toronto? Because now you're living in Toronto.
Well, okay. I should probably say that I mostly date in this city. I've come out here, spent a lot of time in the city. I've also went to school for fashion marketing and merchandising. And so I've always kind of had this relationship with this city. And I always knew that eventually I'd move here. I just didn't know when. And I remember Deanna Pache, she's like, you should move to Toronto. There's so much opportunity. And I was like, I'm not moving until I have like a good paying job and like a set community. So when 2020 hit, when the pandemic hit, I had just actually finished a contract with CBC Manitoba. I was working in syndication radio, national radio. And so at the same time that my contract was up, the pandemic hit. Like literally, I left the office and the streets were bare. So everything was shut down, and the murder of George Floyd happened. And immediately there was this big rush, across the nation for change to happen. And so I sat at a lot of different tables within the film and television industry, from film festivals to networks. And in those building those relationships, I was given the opportunity to produce the first time all Indigenous Share Your Chair episode, which I asked you to be a part of. And then just started freelance producing for Bell and just whatever else I can do. I also do jury work where I sit on juries for funding bodies. So it was really just me moving out here just to kind of get a feel of what's the possibilities in a pandemic case.
Yeah.
Like as if I had all these like I was on cloud 9 throughout the pandemic. And I know that's not everybody's experience. I know that. And I'm aware of that. But for some odd reason, my experience, like I was still traveling to Paris. Like it was,
Wow.
I was still very much like, I'm going to live my life. Because I really thought the pandemic was like the change that we needed. Like I was like, oh yeah, here it is. Here we go. I don't know about now, but at that time I was just on this, like I was high on life. And I was like, I'm gonna move to Toronto. And seeing there was a fellow journalist who put her loft up in Kensington Market up, and she was like, hey, I'm gonna be gone for 6 months. Would you like to take over my apartment? And I was like, I'll do it. And then came out here.
I remember going to that apartment actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember. Okay.
I miss that area. Kensington Market's a vibe, but I also don't. So
right. I love Kensington. Having worked, so it seems like you wear a lot of hats within the film and TV industry. And you did mention George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. And I do feel like there's a really big want and increase of obviously Black voices. Do you feel like, because for context, I feel like being Indigenous, you kind of see these trends. It's almost as if our race is like a trend when something happens within the collective. There's this ignite of wanting to support and amplify and, you know, how can we be of service? But then it almost feels like it fades out.
Absolutely.
And so my question for you is like, have you seen a change? Obviously a change happened during George Floyd's death, but do you feel like that is still being, like, are Black voices still being integrated? Afro-Indigenous voices, are they still being upheld now that it's like been a few years after?
No. I think it was a very reactionary, and we're a very reactionary society. That's why when like the Every Child Matters stuff started coming out and people were changing their things on IG to orange, and I was like, no, we were just here. Yeah. We were just here. Yeah. I'm not doing this. We were just like, literally, I was just here and I'm not doing this again. How long is this going to last? And when is this going to turn into something that corporations just take and make a nuisance out of? And it didn't take long. This stuff doesn't take long for corporations and the larger society to turn things into, I don't know, capitalistic something. And then nothing changes in our communities. Like literally my cousin was shot. My cousin Chris Amiot was shot by Vancouver police 2 summers ago with a beanbag gun. The realities are still very much out there. And so this idea that we're somehow forward, and I'm so excited for all the stuff that's coming out. We have lots to celebrate. There's so much beauty happening, but the realities are still there and we cannot forget that. And I like that you use the word trends. And I always share this story. When I used to work at NCIFM, Dave McLeod, who's the CEO of the station, when he was talking to me, when I was leaving the station, he said to me, you know what, when you're out there, make sure that we're not a trend. Because in the 90s, there was this movement that was happening in the early 90s, and it right away got squashed because it was just a trend. And we need to find and be creative and find ways to navigate this and not become trends. And when certain people say things to me, that like literally stuck with me. And so now as I'm moving with my advocacy work, with my creativity, that always sticks with me. Is this a trend? Is this something you're just wanting to get on? Because one of the things I'm experiencing as an Afro-Indigenous writer is people are wanting to take the Afro-Indigenous experience, the narrative, without the respect of the community. And there are shows that currently air that do not have Afro-Indigenous representation behind the scenes, which is a huge problem, because it's a very unique experience. But there are a lot of people out there that are just taking taking. And the voices that do need to be respected and do need to be understood are being shot to the side.
So you're kind of seeing like, so let's say someone wants to create a story. They would say maybe, Adeline, can I interview you? Can I get your story? And then can I just make with it what it is? Like, is that kind of an example, or what would example be?
It's an example is asking me to be a part of a project about an Afro-Indigenous character, but that character is already written and developed.
Okay, so there's like no integration of the actual lived experience of an Afro-Indigenous person.
Exactly.
And so this writing is coming from maybe like a made-up persona of who that person thinks an Afro-Indigenous person is, based off of the biases that they may have.
Exactly.
And so now you want to see kind of a shift of like more of an integration of Afro-Indigenous voices within every part of the room. Is that kind of what you're wanting to see?
Absolutely. And with different experiences, because right now there just seems to be this call for reconnecting stories. And that's cool. If that's your experience, that's your experience. But that's not my experience. I grew up where I grew up. I very much know who I am. I have my spirit name. I may not speak the language, but I don't feel like I'm a person who's reconnecting. And there are people who see Afro-Indigenous people as reconnecting and want to hear these reconnecting stories. It's like, no, can I just exist? Can we create stories of people like us just existing? Because that would first off help with the anti-Blackness that already exists within Indian country. We need to really nip that in the bud right away. But there's this idea, especially with the white gaze, that somehow we couldn't possibly be a part of, a community. How is that even? Like, I remember the first time I sat in a meeting with one of the big networks. They were like, oh my God, I didn't even think about that intersection. Like, it was like a whole for a lot of people. And I'm like, what? I'm like an old lady now. What do you mean you're just hearing about my intersection? That's crazy.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, like Indigenous voices, we're always fighting for our recognition and our visibility. But then you have the intersections of Afro-Indigeneity. And I feel like that's probably just as much, if not more, of fight, like you have to fight for visibility. And so for you as a writer and a storyteller, what stories do you want to be shared and shown for Afro-Indigenous people? Like, what would your ideal story be?
It would be just a story of an Afro-Indigenous person just existing every day. We see her get ready. Just being herself, going on dates. What's that like? For me, when I date, depends on how I wear my hair. You know what I mean? If I wear my hair straight, I attract different type of men. If I wear my hair in braids, you know what I mean? Like, that would be fun to see on screen.
Yeah.
But just things like that, just our everyday experiences that isn't about having to show you my culture,
Right.
Like, I can also do that in my show, but it doesn't let me be a human being as well. Like, I was writing on this one show and the character was a Native boy who was like into occult stuff. And one of the producers was like, maybe we should basically trying to indigenize him. And I'm like, it's okay if he's Native and is into occult stuff, that exists. Like, we don't need to.
That's true.
We just let it be, But anyway, it's things like that I'm just like, let us be.
Yeah. Actually, I thought about this the other week because I was like looking at content of Indigenous influencers and content creators. And I noticed that we are always speaking in either a cultural or like a historical sense.
Yep.
And I was like,
educational,
cultivating awareness. And then I was like, wow, I don't think there's anyone just like simply being themselves online. Just like cracking jokes, like just living their lives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that happened after the murder of George Floyd was people were like, my followers were going, oh, if you want to be educated, follow Adeline Bird. And I'm like, the audacity of you to even think I'm going to sit online all day and educate you all. Like,
well, it's just like free emotional labor too. At the end of the day.
Yeah. Like, no, I'm not. I'm a creative. I need to be creating. That's where creativity for me saves me. It's literally my lifesaver. It's what I love doing and supporting other creatives. This, like, you need to educate people, adding that layer, like, I don't want to do that.
It is very like tiring, and at some point I feel like you kind of get stuck in the history. Like for me, always educating about the past, it's like I've know it so much now. At what point are we going to start talking about the solutions and also creating a new timeline that is integrated with joy and love and healing and kinship? And that's kind of my next question too, is like, I know there has been, like you had said, anti-Blackness within Indigenous communities. Do you feel like we are developing more kinship with our Afro-Indigenous relatives? Do you feel like there's still a lot of work that needs to happen within our communities? And where do you think that work has to start?
I feel like we are at a point of recognition, and we are at a point of understanding the importance of that relationship, but we're not there yet. And to go back to what you were saying about, to go back to your other question about what you were saying about like, there's no one just existing and we end up in this educational, this past thing. It is why I push so hard to have a Share Your Chair episode where you see modern Indigenous women, right? And the moment we start just seeing people as they are, then you can start to see people like me. And understand that we're all just here. We're all like, so I was in Louisiana for my birthday last winter. And oh my gosh, like I've never been in a place where I was treated like a first class citizen. Like I never had that feeling before, but until I went there. And I was like, me and my friends were getting into restaurants, clubs, just easily, everywhere, just easily. And I'm like, we were like, what is happening? And then we went for an Uber ride, and there were all these billboards that said, let Black girls be. And I was like, whoa, I wonder if that's why we're like, getting into all these places. But I thought, imagine if we had billboards like that here, where it just said, let Indigenous girls be, or First Nation girls be, like, holy, how that would just change and shift the consciousness. You know what I mean? Like, you gotta let people be. You gotta let people, and going back to the second question about the relations, you gotta let people be themselves and express themselves without an attachment to an idea that you may already have, right? One of the things that I find when I'm in particularly in Native spaces, is there's always this like unicorn. I'm treated like this unicorn, and I'm like, no, like don't. I'm just as it's just like, no, I'm here just like you. Yes, I may have this mixed identity, and I may come to the table with another perspective because I also share lineage with African people. And so I'm going to come with a different flavor. That doesn't mean that I'm not Indigenous. That doesn't mean that I'm not First Nations. I just come to the table. I would actually say I'm very creative. I'm super creative, and I feel like that's a gift of both my ancestors on both sides.
Well, and so now that you have like all the tools to share those stories of your ancestors, like when you think of, what we've gone through, what you've gone through, what you've been through, where do you hope to see the future of like Afro-Indigenous representation and inclusion within the film and TV industry? Because I know we mentioned a little bit about how you want to see people behind the screens, but like what else does that look like? How else can the film industry support that?
By supporting stories like mine that are, again, of just Afro-Indigenous characters existing, being in family, like my family, I come from a big, like Black and Native family. I grew up with cousins. Like I have a lot of Black and Native cousins. Like I never grew up feeling like I was the only one. We used to have our family barbecues in a park called Vimy Ridge back home. And people would walk by and they'd be like, "Is this a community barbecue?" Like, we're like, "No, this is our family barbecue," you know? Because I have cousins who are Iraqi and Anishinaabe, Vietnamese and Anishinaabe, you know? Like, my cousin Ali is Pakistani and Anishinaabe. And if me and him sat beside each other, you wouldn't even think we're related, but we're related. And those are the type of stories I hope to see in the future. And I want to participate in pushing is those stories. Like Native people know how to love. We are so welcoming. You know what I mean? And the way we build, like truly build relationships with other nations is so beautiful.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to see, because our people need to see that, especially those who live in isolated communities where they don't get to see that often. You know what I mean? But yeah, I really hope that the industry, and I've been out here saying this, starts to understand that that building of relations comes from those intersectionalities.
Right. And I know that like we know how important these stories are, and I know that we always fight for them in the rooms. But do you think that like our calls to action are actually being implemented by the people that, you know, have the stakes or have the shares, or the people that are making the decisions? Because you've worked with like The Social, for example, you've worked with some networks, and I guess, is your voice being honored in those spaces is kind of what I'm asking. I
mean, if it was, we would be having an all Indigenous Share Your Chair every year.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I just think there is this idea that these things need to take long, that there needs to be a process, and we need to have 10,000 meetings before we do these things. Yeah. I think that's lazy. I think we have a lot of people who don't want to do that work. When I used to work, I'm a social worker academically, and I used to while I was going to university, I used to work in a homeless shelter, Main Street Project, and when I was working there, that's when the whole analogy of harm reduction was introduced into the overall healthcare system. And it was hard for people to change. It was so hard. And I couldn't understand like how people couldn't understand how harm reduction is actually what we need to be doing. Because that was implemented in the policies, it was like implemented in the overall federal system, people had to change, right? And that's the same thing that needs to happen within the film and television industry is the federal system needs to make sure that this overall change is happening. And they have asked us. I had a meeting with the CRTC a couple of weeks ago, and we were asked, what does it mean to make Canadian content? And I was like, well, if you look at the word Canadian.
I was going to say, I don't know if we even abide.
Yeah, exactly. Like, as a First Nations woman, I don't think this applies to me. It really is, the top needs to get their shit together. And really organize to make sure that our people are cared for, that our voices are honored, and that they understand that the TRC has call to actions, that MMIWG has calls to actions, and these are gifts. I always say to people, these calls of actions are gifts from the families and the people who went through these experiences. Like, I don't know what else you want.
It's literally, providing like the framework for healing and for integrating our voices.
Absolutely. I think, so I do jury work with Telefilm.
Okay.
And so I did not know that. I'm like, oh, really? But of course, but Telefilm does have an Indigenous stream.
Yeah.
And for what I think needs to happen is we need to go out into the communities and pay people and pay people well to teach people about how to apply for these things, right? Because my experience sitting on some of these juries, not just Telefilm, but there's other funding bodies, is we're not taking up that space. And
like there's not enough applicants?
There's not enough applicants, or our stories fall short. You know what I mean? And we really need to take a look at what we need to do, what steps we need to do to get more people engaged and get their stories into top tier, or create a funding program or something where you're like getting people ready for talent to watch. You know what I mean? So yeah,
I'm in a new program actually through Capilano University, and it's for helping Indigenous filmmakers produce their own production company.
Yes.
So I'm learning all about the insides of like Cavco and working with unions and all this. But what I also recognize is, like you're saying, one, I wouldn't be able to afford like tuition, the cost of even getting into these programs and getting the trainings is something that we also don't have access to.
Right.
My reserve funds 2 kids a year to go to school. Maybe it's changed, but like it's actually ridiculous.
Yep. It's even a huge barrier for me. There are all these programs and they're I'm like, that's my rent.
Right.
Like I gotta choose what I'm going to be putting myself into. There's and honestly, a lot of these like programs do a lot of that, where it's you got to pay or you got to go through this just this like really harsh process, and you're just like, what did I even do? You know? But it's really got to change. That's why I really appreciate the Indigenous Screen Office. Because they don't make things complicated.
We're literally sitting here because of Indigenous Screen Office.
Exactly. And they don't, because they get it. They get, sometimes things aren't gonna look perfect. You know what I mean? Like we're not gonna be able to, those applications where it's like, there's one application out there where they're asking everybody, does your project have anything to do with Indigenous people? So you're just asking everybody, like, it's so weird.
And then it kind of, you're unsure who's actually getting that money. Like, again, it's coming back to like almost like taking our stories, getting money off of our stories. But then there's actually no like Indigenous writers or directors or producers that are behind the scenes. And that's what I really love about this program. One of the first things they said within it was, we've noticed a thing within film and TV is like usually there's an Indigenous writer, there's a director, but then there's no Indigenous producer. And that's sometimes the one that's like calling all the shots. And so this program's like, we want to create more Indigenous producers.
Absolutely.
So that we can have writer, director, producer. We're all running the whole show.
And that goes right down to below the line, right? Like making sure that the people that head the hair department, the makeup department, the props department, there are, I think, 10 different departments or 7 different departments with like 10 different jobs in each one. I'm hoping to go to Indigenomics to talk about this because we can this literally can just like can be a part of just the economy.
Yeah.
We're giving people jobs, we're running, but people treat it like this like hoity-toity prestigious thing. It's like, no, some people like just work here, you know, like this is a job for some people, and that's okay. This doesn't have to be Hollywood. It doesn't have to be any of that.
We don't want it to be like Hollywood.
Right? Like, look at the state of it.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't know right now.
It's crumbling. It's in the beginning of its fall, and I love watching it.
Well, it's built like upon a false light. Like I find.
Absolutely.
And I feel like it's dismantling of like the egos and like there's all this like old timelines that people aren't relating to that anymore. And I think also like people don't relate to like having massive amounts of wealth. Like that's not ideal. Like how do we begin to also redistribute the wealth and also back into like Black and Indigenous hands of like where these stories are built and where these stories come from.
Yes. I was talking to my friend Oscar Baker. Shout out to Oscar Baker. Who's a journalist, And he was like, Adeline, he's like, financial freedom is resistance for us. And I was like, yeah, like it's why I can walk away from shitty gigs. Because I don't have to, you know what I mean?
I don't say no.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I can say F you, like I need some of that F you money.
Yeah.
So I don't have to stay in toxic spaces and places. Because there's a lot out there for us. Sets aren't always safe. Our own communities aren't always safe. So I just feel like we need to get in the position and allow people to have production companies own our stories.
Exactly.
Own our work. I don't understand why anybody would want to own a story that has nothing to do with them.
Well, if you look at history, you might get some answers.
I mean, yeah, but like, really, are we still doing that?
I know, right? No, it's like this, ownership. Well, Nicole was talking about data sovereignty actually earlier before you got here too.
I'm all about data. I'm all about data sovereignty. I'm all about data.
Also, a good thing though is like some of these stories aren't ours because they're like generational. So it's almost like we need to create a whole new thing around like cultural ownership because like I'm not gonna say I own like a creation story, Right. So what does that look like? It's almost like we need to create like a whole new thing that has like the community or like the cultural significance involved within the data.
Right. I get what you're saying.
Because like if I share a creation story with you, it's like I don't own that.
Well, we there was when I worked on Trickster, there was I think it was a protest song. And everybody was scrambling to find ownership, and no one could
of it.
Yeah,
well, and that's the thing. Some things are passed down.
Exactly. And they're like, no one owns this. This is a protest song. This is for everybody. This is for the community. And it's like, yeah,
it's almost like returning like to. I don't know much about traditional law, but I hear it's like creator's law. So it's almost like returning to like the agreement that you have with creator. I think I think like ownership also like. It's not so much the physical, it's also spiritual for us. It's like what I'm trying to get to.
Right.
It's like your contract with like creator in a way.
Right. But also like the concept of ownership though.
That's what I mean. It's like I can't really get my head around ownership because
it's the same with me.
Even with like land, like I would never say like I own the land.
Exactly.
I don't know.
Exactly.
I think it's just the word.
It absolutely is the word, and it's the concept and what my brain has been indoctrinated to connect to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because it takes like the relational aspect out of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it's almost like this fragmented, distorted. And then that's when relationships get fractured. And then you just keep repeating the same patterns that have been instilled in us since colonization.
Exactly.
Which we don't want to do. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Like it's okay to destroy things and take things without that exchange. I definitely relate to that. I remember reading this article, I think it was in The Guardian, and it was written by, I think it was a white journalist, but he was talking about how we need to go into the Anishinaabe way of thinking in terms of ownership, that we like Native people don't think about ownership in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I watch some of my friends when they own things, just how like ugly they'll get.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like there was also something mentioned about ownership in that book by she's an activist. She's an attorney, Sherry Mitchell. She wrote Sacred Instructions, but she actually speaks about ownership and coming back to like how we view things within our language rather than like the English, like she's like, we look at it completely different. But now I want to like go back to her book to see exactly what she says. But there is something, she talks about the same concept.
Right.
And I'm wondering for you, like, okay, so now that we've talked a little bit about what we want to see in the film industry, like what we want to create, is there an example of someone that's like doing it well?
I don't think so.
Okay, I'm just curious.
We're all trying to navigate a really messed up system. So we're all gonna be flawed. You know what I mean? And I personally, I wish that we would be more honest about when we mess up, because then that way I know how not to move. You know what I mean? Like, because like film and TV is really messed up. And it's a really unhealthy industry. There's lots of work that needs to go into it. I believe producers need to take courses because you're working with people.
Yeah.
You need to take courses on human behavior and know how to tell if someone's experiencing PTSD, like just all these human things that producers miss because they're just so in this small world. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I want us to be in a space where we can just say, I'm here and I'm messy.
Yeah.
And I partake in messy things and but this idea that we're doing it right, that we got to do it right. No, we got to give ourselves permission to mess up and be okay with the mess up.
Well, and doing it right, like what does that even mean? Like it may
There's
look
no such
completely
thing.
different for me and you.
Yeah.
If like what I think's right and what you think, it's kind of like binary.
Exactly. It's we're not perfect. We're all doing our best with whatever it is that we know. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But again, I just think we got to get to a place where we can be safe, feel safe enough to say, I messed up and here's how I messed up. And so this next production coming up, don't do this. You know what I mean?
and it's also like on the other part of that, it's almost like finding forgiveness too for like, because like I think taking accountability is one part of it, but then it's like, what does, like you're saying, like what does conflict resolution look like between our communities and also on set? Because I don't know about you, but like sometimes I'll just like shut down or I'll not even respond to the person. I'll just ghost. And then it's just like, there's a fracture there.
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm really interested in like, what would our communities do in terms of like healing those relations and in terms of like conflict resolution? Because like, I don't know.
I have one thing to say. I think we need to deal with things right away and get good at dealing with things right away, right? Because when we don't, like you said, we allow things to linger. But it's hard when you're working within a institution that is set up a certain way, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And then you also have non-Indigenous people that are also in the mix and don't really understand the dynamics between our communities and how those dynamics work. So I think we need to first really get good at being able to hold each other accountable safely and effectively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know what that looks like.
I don't know.
I don't have the answers.
We're coming up with ideas here.
Yeah, we're just asking questions into the universe.
Yeah. How can all the listeners support the work that you're creating? Also, what are you up to this year? Like, I feel like I haven't seen you in a minute.
Honestly, I'm trying to go back into podcasting.
Woo.
I'm also writing a book, a novel, a romance. I don't want to say romance because I don't see dating and all that like the way that society wants us to. So I always try to say romance slice of life. What
do you mean? Like the gender roles and like the
monogamy? It's always like, oh, well, they fall in love and there's this happy ending. Like, no, let's see some messy stuff. And let's see a Native woman get messy, you know? Like,
just follow me around with cameras. I'll be a case study.
But like, that's the type of stuff I'm writing right now.
Oh God!
So I'm writing a novel called Unfiltered. It's about an Afro-Indigenous influencer who gets called a pretendian. It's called Unfiltered, and anyway, she's going through her whole phase as she's like navigating becoming an influencer. I just love her. And every time I always share the story with like my male friends and some of my gay guy friends, and they're just like, I feel like I read your diary or something. I'm like,
you're like, is this your journal? Is this your manifestation journal?
So I'm doing that. I also want to create a podcast and just like incorporate Indigenous erotic stories, like just really like bring our stories to a forefront in a creative and different way. yeah, and then I have some film projects that I'm working on that I obviously can't talk about. I'm acting. I've been auditioning for some like really amazing shows. So I'm like, okay, something's coming. And yeah, I'm just trying to figure it out right now.
Yeah, me and you both. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show for the second time. And I always learn so much and I'm inspired by all the work that you're doing. How can people support you moving forward? Where can they follow you? Where can they listen to your podcast?
Well, the podcast isn't out yet, but I'm so boring on social media. And so I'm at Adeline Adeline Bird _ on IG.
I'm like, I don't know. Are you asking me?
On IG. And then Facebook. I love Facebook because I come from that generation. And that's where I spend a lot of my time is Facebook. And Indian countries like there, you know? So I love being on Facebook and seeing all the memes and just interacting with people. So yeah, you can find me on Facebook. I'm always announcing the things I'm working on my social media. Yeah, might take a while, but I'm brewing things.
Brewing things. Hopefully you won't be made into a meme one day. Just all of a sudden on your own feed. Right? Knock on wood. Let's not make that happen. Awesome. Well, thanks, Adeline. And thank you all for tuning in. Hi.